What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Education Nation on Black Video News. I am your host, Dr. Mateen Diop. I am the self-proclaimed champion of America's public schools. I am absolutely happy to be here for another edition, another week, another episode of All Things Educational. We have a really packed show for you today. We're going to talk about some things that you may or may not be interested in, but I don't know who's not interested in education. So we're going to be talking about teacher layoffs. We're going to be talking about where the students are going and a few other things when we come back. But I just want to let you know that this is where you come for Black Video News, to Education Nation, for you again, all things educational. I am Dr. Mateen Diop. I am your host. And again, I am America's self-proclaimed champion of America's public schools. We'll be right back.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Oh boy.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Education Nation. I'm your host, Dr. Mateen Diop, right here on Black Video News, your self-proclaimed champion of America's public schools. This is a channel where we talk about all things educational, and I am that educator to give you all the news and information you could possibly ever want to hear. If you care anything about America's public school systems, charter schools, higher ed, anything that has to do with education, this is where you come to get all that information. I have all kinds of guests that'll be coming on. We'll be doing special segments. Sometimes we'll actually be out of the studio somewhere on the road. But again, to bring you everything and tell you everything you need to know about education. Today, I'm going to discuss three things today. I wrote them down. I even wrote them down for you. I'm going to discuss three things. Number one, we're going to be talking about the layoffs that are happening right now in education. I want to bring up that article if I could. I want to bring up that article when I start talking about that. So I'm talking to my producer, there it is. And then we're going to be talking about, are public schools still needed? And then we're going to finally end with, you're laid off? Now what? Okay? So stay with me. We're going to go right back into it in 3, 2, 1. So I'm live here, so we're going to just keep going back with it. So bring up that article about the layoffs. This is where we're going to start. Again, I'm Dr. Mateen Diop, Education Nation, right here on Black Video News. You can find out more about me on my website, drmateendiop.com. You can purchase my books. We can start a conversation, but this is where we're going to be talking about all things educational. But this is where I want to start. Schools are bracing for widespread teacher layoffs, and this is on CNN. And, you know, the article goes into why there are such widespread layoffs. And it's funny, I was talking to a colleague of mine who was a former educator, and just talking about all the issues that she had when it came to being a classroom teacher. Student discipline, administrators kind of detached from what's going on, central office not really caring, and that really caused basically a big ruckus in her life and big ruckus in the school. So as a teacher, I can guarantee you that one of the reasons that teachers are leaving, again, student discipline. Student discipline is just crucial to run a school. You might as well say student discipline is more like structure and order. So you have to have structure. You have to have order in your school if you want to have a good school. When I was a classroom teacher, I taught 6th and 7th and 8th grade, 3 years in a row, but I taught 1 year 6th, next year 7th, and the next 2 years I taught 8th grade. And I can tell you that as a teacher, the first thing you have to have is control of your classroom. So what does that say for the principal? So the principal has control of the entire school. So what I would always, as a principal, try to impart to my teachers and always try to help them with and give them is to how to manage your classroom. How do you do that? What are some strategies you can use? And it's different for everybody. But I would always tell the teachers that if you take your classroom and you kind of give it to me to run, I guarantee you I can run it. But I'm going to show you how to run it. So that's what's happening with all the schools. Students, they're just kind of leaving the school. And that's making all the reason teachers are being laid off, of course, is because the students aren't going to be there. But the question is, the students aren't going to be there, but the question is, where are they going? They have to go somewhere. They're not going to school. The question is, where are they going to go? In Texas, there's a big fight with our governor about vouchers. Vouchers. Do we want the public to pay for school vouchers? Basically to give parents a choice as to where they send their children. So that's what we're talking about in Texas. So if that passes, let's say the governor passes that and the public pays for school vouchers and parents can send their children anywhere they want to go, then what's going to happen to the public school? That's going to be the question. And I can tell you that if that happens, and it's already kind of happening, if you look at Houston ISD, that has been taken over by the state, and several other school districts around the state of Texas have already been taken over by the state, then that tells you kind of the things to come. So students are going to leave. Students represent money. That's what happens. When you have a student in your classroom, though every head in that classroom represents a certain amount of dollars. And we can get into school funding and all that kind of stuff later, but just so you know, every student in your classroom, every student in your building represents a certain amount of money. And when that student leaves, the money leaves. So the student leaves and the money follows. So if the student leaves and goes to a charter school, goes to a private school, well, really a charter school, they go to a charter school, that money, whatever they were getting at that public school, is going to follow them to the charter school. So some might even ask, so what's the benefit? Why go to a charter school? What is the benefit of going from public to charter? Good question. When I come back, we're going to talk about what is the benefit. Why would you send your child to a charter school versus a public school? We're going to be right back to answer that question. Don't go anywhere. Education Nation, Dr. Mateen Diop here on Black Video News.
There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do.
Did you have a good day at school?
She gave them some broth without any bread.
There you go.
And kissed them all soundly
Night night. Good night.
and put them to bed. Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org.
Welcome back to Education Nation. I'm your host, Dr. Mateen Diop. Again, the self-proclaimed, nobody gave me this. I gave it to myself, America's champion of neighborhood schools. That's me, and that's what I've always been about. And we're here on Black Video News to talk about all things educational. We're back to talk about charter schools. And I always ask the question, parents, community, if you had a neighborhood school, the school that you went to, that your children went to, and your mamas and everybody else went to that neighborhood school, and then a charter school comes in, and you decide to send your children to that charter school, what is the thing that changed your mind, that made you switch and say, my child can get a better education at charter school A or charter school B? It doesn't matter the charter school. What made you make the decision that my child can get a better education over here? I read an article yesterday from a brother. He's a college professor in Charlotte, North Carolina. And one of the things he said, he asked this question about black men in teaching. And so I thought, well, maybe more black men are at the charter school. That's not the case. They're actually more at the public school. So he said, well, maybe if we get more black men in schools to teach, then maybe that'll sway more kids to come, at least black kids, to go where there are more black teachers. I mean, I haven't done any research or any data on that, but I can tell you just as a black man myself, as I came up through the public education system, when I was in elementary school, all my teachers were black. First grade, second grade, third, all the way up to fifth grade, they were all black. When I got to middle school, I had a few black teachers, but it was mixed. They were black, Hispanic. They were just mixed and white in middle school. When I got to high school, none of my teachers were black, except the football coach and the track coach. They were black. But all of my classes, not one time that I have a black teacher. So when I left and came back and went through and became an educator myself, I was in a school when I taught middle school where it was probably 2 black men that actually taught one of the core courses, reading, writing, math, all that stuff. There were 2 of us. And then when I became an elementary administrator, I was the only male, period. Not only just black male, I was the only male, period, in the school. And of course, when I became a high school principal, I was intentional about hiring black male educators. So I always thought that maybe if I hired more black male educators, that the parents in my neighborhood would choose my school over the charter school. But it's funny because they didn't. I would go and I would talk to my friends in the neighborhood who were also educators. There were way more black men in charter schools than there were in public schools. And again, it wasn't because one was better than the other. It was because it was easier for black men to go teach in charter schools because they didn't have the same requirement, meaning they weren't certified to come into the public school. And the charter school had all these exemptions so they could go in and they could get into any charter school they wanted because they had those exemptions. So maybe that's the discussion we need to have, what those exemptions look like. So when we come back, we're going to just talk about that a little bit more and what that might look like in your school. What does it do when you can have these exemptions? Should the charter schools, should the public schools go after these exemptions? We don't know, but it's something for us to talk about. We'll be right back. Education Nation, Dr. Mateen Diop, the self-proclaimed champion of America's public schools. We'll be right back.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Oh boy.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Welcome back to Education Nation. I'm your host, Dr. Mateen Diop, right here on Black Video News. Again, I'm the self-proclaimed champion of America's public schools. We've talked about so much today, but I wanted to leave you with something that's just kind of a little bit more positive and hopefully uplift you. Our first segment, we talked about teacher layoffs, and all these layoffs are coming, not just there's no state immune to teacher layoffs. Everybody's getting laid off. And the reason you lay folks off, of course, is money, always down to the dollar. Schools are talking about and school districts are talking about this money that they're losing because of the pandemic. So when the pandemic hit, when COVID hit, of course, all the schools were infused with all these federal dollars. These federal dollars allowed them to buy things like hotspots and Chromebooks and all these devices for students to use for remote learning. And they also were able to hire additional staff, curriculum specialists, mental health type people, all of that stuff. So they had this influx of federal money that is running out. And so when that federal money runs out, of course, that means all the things that money was used to pay for, all those things have to go because they also did hire extra teachers. So when we talked about funding in the last segment, we talked about funding, and I want to talk about that a little bit more before we go into my last part. When we talk about school funding, again, if you don't remember anything, just remember that a student represents dollars. That's why they're the last to get in trouble for doing anything. Because if you get rid of a student, then you get rid of those dollars. So imagine a teacher in the classroom. A teacher is getting his or her salary doing their thing, and they have a very disruptive student in the class. Very disruptive. Student who has done enough to actually be sent out of the classroom. And let's say the teacher sends the child out of the classroom, calls the assistant principal. The assistant principal comes in and investigates. They do a suspension. Well, suspension doesn't mean you lose money because the student is still enrolled there. But then that child, let's say the child complains to their parent. The parent calls the superintendent. The superintendent calls the principal. The principal has to go talk to the teacher. Meanwhile, the student who did everything they did goes blameless. That's the reason why teachers are leaving. And that's the reason why a lot of students are just kind of going to different schools. So how do you combat that? Again, I'm going to go back to the structure thing. You have to have structure. But again, that's a whole nother conversation. But I wanted to leave you with this. When you're being laid off of any job, I read the article yesterday about Tesla laying off 500,000 people, however many they're laying off. And one of the things I hear everybody saying is there's always something better. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. There's always something better. When you're being laid off your job, teachers, and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do in the next school year, don't worry about it. There's always something better. One of my favorite scriptures, I believe, is Philippians. I don't believe it is Philippians. When it says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That is how you have to think. I would always say as a high school principal, positive attitude changes everything. Your attitude determines your altitude. When you get laid off, if you want to go back into the classroom, you can go anywhere you want to go. What I would suggest, of course, is to create your own classroom. But that's, again, an entirely different story. When you get laid off, remember, something better is coming. Never give up. Always know that inside of you, something good is going to always happen. Schools aren't going anywhere. The way we know them might change. The way we know schools to be may change. But schools themselves, education is not going anywhere. But we have to work on a new model. We have to revisit and revision how we look at schools. How do we educate our students? Because there's no more than just sit there. They're going to sit and get in what we have to take. Now we have to really challenge them and challenge their thinking and teach more than just reading, writing, arithmetic. We have to teach them entrepreneurship. We have to teach them how to talk to one another. We have to teach them soft skills. We have to teach them AI. There's lots of things we have to do. And right now, in my opinion, public education is not doing it. It's not up to the challenge. So when you get laid off, think about it. Think about what you can do to make it better instead of going right back into the same rut you were in, because that's what you were in. All right? So go to my website, drmateendiop.com, and we're going to talk about this some more. Until next week, I'm right here, Education Nation, same time, same channel with Black Video News. Dr. Mateen Diop, we'll see you next week. Peace.